maybe just a few housekeeping announcements beforehand. We'll be taking 2 weeks off for those that don't get the newsletter. During the time that Sasha and I will be in, or the time that I will be in Israel, we're expecting another grandson any day now. And even with that, though, I will be starting a new course. The time has already been set, and it's with another organization, and that's the Book of Daniel. It says Daniel in 12 meetings. I would add maybe at least 12 meetings. We may do a little bit more, depending on, depending on how far we get. We can finish the book in 12 meetings, but this is Daniel, of course, the Book of Daniel. But we may want to add Daniel and the Book of Revelation, for instance, Daniel and ancient Ugaritic or Canaanite literature, Daniel in art. So we'll see how it goes. But that course is going to begin on Monday, the 14th, something like that. Announcement. If you don't get our announcements, please send me a message and I will make sure you get it. It's being offered through another organization, the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County, which I've done some work with in the past. And you've got to register through them, and they have a schedule of possible fees. They're flexible with the fee for the course. I know that for some of you, it feels like it's just one more thing to pay. On the other hand, as I said yesterday, I think that those of you who have been attending class with Ora Midbar over the last 2 years will agree that there's a lot of services being provided, and it's a good deal. People are getting a good deal. Again, as I said yesterday, I'm not complaining in any way, but please look kindly upon this organization asking for a fee for the class as well. They are paying Ora Midbar for my services. And that's part of our business model, is not only relying upon your sponsorships of different kinds, but also the religious services that I provide by doing funerals and other ceremonies, weddings, and teaching in other places. And my work with Idlewild falls under that category. All that goes to the budget of Ora Midbar that makes everything we do possible, not only the study, but the prayer and the social justice work we do. Okay, so whoever is here, and we will begin. We'll begin by just mentioning that to all of you in other places like France and Chicago and Washington, D.C., we had rain yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before? Yesterday. Yesterday it was raining. Even hard, I would say, at least for a few minutes. And so, there. It's not only heat, not only 123 degrees heat, it's also rain from time to time. Okay, we're in the second chapter, or the second session on Samson. It's also the second chapter. Shimshon HaGibor, Samson the hero, the superhero, the one upon whom the Spirit of God descends. That was the way that the last chapter ended, after that business between his mom and his dad and the angel, and what exactly happened there. But we already saw a dynamic, an interesting dynamic, family dynamic that's going to come up today as well. And that is the relationship between the father, the mother, and the son. And perhaps questioning the traditional forms of that hierarchy, that family order, which is supposed to be the norm. But here is certainly not the norm. And that's because Samson's birth was not normal. It was totally not normal. It was miraculous. It was heavenly even. And there are stipulations as well. I will remind you that he's not to cut his hair, or she is not to cut his hair, his mother. She is not to become impure or to drink wine or any grape byproduct, or become impure. And then that is incumbent upon him as well. Let's keep that in the back of our minds as we go through this story. And let's just keep that in the back of the mind. And probably the most important point I would make today is that the last line of the chapter, God's Spirit descends upon upon Samson. He started to roam. You can just imagine him. It's a comment that seems to hint that there are other stories, but we don't have them. Anyway, something's about to happen. That's where we left off with the storyteller. So why don't we begin with 1 to 2. Wayne, would you like to read for us, please?
Once Samson went down to Timnah, and while in Timnah, he noticed a girl among the Philistine women. On his return, he told his father and mother, "I noticed one of the Philistine women in Timnah. Please get her for me as a wife."
Before we get to the substance itself, the form of the language. The Hebrew has vayered Shimshon, which means Samson went down. Now, going down doesn't always mean topographical down, up or down. It means leaving a particular area. We have a very similar language. I don't know if anybody would remember a very similar language involving even the place Timnah or Timnata. It's a long shot. It's Genesis 38. It happens to be a chapter of the Hebrew Bible that I worked on, literally worked on for 5 years with my friends and dear friends and teachers, Yair Zakovich and Avigdor Shenan. That's why I quote them so much. You hear me quoting Zakovich more than Shenan because we're doing together mostly Bible studies. Both of them are retired professors at Hebrew University of great popularity and serious academic endeavor. Zakovich was in the Bible department, and it was on his course that I fell upon by accident, or shall we say, God working in the background, in my first year at Hebrew University, where I didn't have a clue what I was doing, and it fit my work schedule. I was working in a bookstore in Mea Sharim, and that was like the only course that one of the few courses that fit my schedule, so I took it. And it was a lovely course about the stories of Elijah and Elisha in the book of Kings. And so I began to take courses with him every year, and then we became friends. And because I had a good knowledge of rabbinic, I'd been to yeshiva, and rabbinic commentaries, medieval rabbinic commentaries, and rabbinic literature, he asked me to join a research project that he had going on with Avigdor Shenan, who was a professor of Midrash, whom I didn't know at the time. And I met him through that, and then I started to take his courses. And when I did work on a PhD, which I didn't finish, I will add, you all know, that was under the guidance of Professor Avigdor Shenan, because it made more sense for me to do it in the Midrash department or the Hebrew literature department. And so if we were to do Midrashic work, which we sometimes do, but if we do a Midrashic, just a class on Midrash of some sort, I would be quoting Avigdor much more. They're both dear friends and wonderful, wonderful teachers. I learned more in those 5 years of being their research assistant on this project than any other course that I took, certainly. So, and so that's why I know Genesis 38 in and out, right? And that's Judah, Vayered Me'et Achav. Judah goes down, literally down, but goes away from his brothers. And in that story is this place Timnah, Timnata. The difference between Timnah and Timnata has to do with a Hebrew language thing. You can say in Hebrew to Timnah, you can say it la Timnah, but the classical Hebrew way is Timnata. For those that know the word bait, right? Ani holech, you could say ani holech labait, but nobody says that. Instead, they use the classical ani holech habaita, I'm going home. By adding the hey at the end, it's a directional hey, I think it's called, or local hey or something. I don't. So just to say, why am I going into so much detail here? That Samson went down to Timnah, I don't think is a geographical or topographical thing. It's that he left his people, because what did he do? He left the circles of his own Danite culture, his friends and family, of which we're not told much of course. And he finds, of all the people, he goes to a Philistine community, and there he casts his eyes upon a woman who he wants. And that's exactly what it says. He said, he saw the woman, and he said to his parents, I want her. As Zakovich said once, in one of the first times I heard him teach this, he says, it's like a kid who walks by a toy store, points in the window, I want that toy, right? I want that toy. I want it, give it to me. I want it now. Now that's reading into the text a little bit, but I think if you'll be open to the interpretation that why Samson seems to be a bit of a zlob, he's a big, a starka jung, right? He's a strong young man. He has the mind of a child. He's a man child, I think we would call him perhaps. And so of course the Philistines are in the background here. The Philistines are the quintessential bone in the throat of the Israelites. While different Canaanite, the land of Canaan is kind of a catchphrase for the whole Levant, or at least certainly our part, that when we talk about the ancient land of Israel. And while there was a nation called Canaan, that became kind of a catchphrase. I don't know what it would be like today, the Franks, and calling that whole country France. I don't know, even though there were other tribes there before, other peoples. And so, and you have the Jebusites and the Hittites were from a way far different area, but you've got these different nations that come and go, the Ammonites we had recently. But the Philistines, they are there all the time, pushing and pushing and pushing, especially in these books here, right? In the books of Judges and Samuel, and even in Kings as well. In Kings, I don't remember if it's in Kings. But the whole point here, they're kind of this. I don't want to call them the arch enemy, because the Amalekites deserve that title as the arch enemy, as the evil ones. This one, the Philistines, they're living their lives, right? They're on the coast. They got the whole coast, the area. If you can imagine the map, didn't bring the maps today, but you could look yourself. The area of, as you know, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gat, which is a little bit inland in the southern part, Ekron, which is opposite, say, Ashdod, or a little bit north of there, the area of Rehovot today, and Gaza. So you've got those 5 major cities, and those were the cities of the Philistines. It takes a king, right, to defeat them. Right, the first defeat, semi-defeat. No, one of the first in the time of Saul. David is fighting them, but of course, and Goliath is a Philistine, Goliath. But it takes it takes the king, the royalty, to defeat it, and that's kind of in the background of here. In other words, this constant stress, tension with the Philistines, this border, and Samson is the beginning salvo of eating away at their control over the area, and that's in the background of the whole story here. So it's ironic, of course, that it starts with the fact that he falls in love at first sight, or he lusts after the daughter of a Philistine, and that's the background. Any comments or questions? So Wayne, why don't you read another one for us, another section?
His father and mother said to him, "Is there no one among the daughters of your own kinsmen and among all our people that you must go and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson answered his father, "Give me that one, for she is the one that pleases me." His father and mother did not realize that this was the Lord's doing. He was seeking a pretext against the Philistines, for the Philistines were ruling over Israel at the time.
Okay. The translation here is a kind translation, and there's even a kinder translation. Sojin, who is one of the commentators I use on a regular basis from I think he's Italian, and it probably came out in the 70s or so. So Sojin's translation here is perhaps. Is there not perhaps another? That's very, very kind language. When I read the Hebrew, I read this, Vayomer lo aviv imo, his parents said to him, right? And the fact that it says said in singular, Vayomer, that's singular, and it's aviv imo, his mother and his father, that happens a lot. We see that a lot with Aaron and Moses, for instance. The more important one, or at least the formally more important one, it gets the verb. By the way, many commentators have amend the text here to say that imo, the mother, shouldn't belong here. It's really the father's business to arrange the wedding. But of course, I would argue, and that's under the influence of the teachers I had, no, that's exactly the point here. This is a story about a different kind of family. And in this family, there's the formal aspect of the father, right? Oh, he's got to see the angel. I tell us what to do. And the angel says, but I already told your wife. You're late at this show, right? And she says, it's not my fault. I asked her, I asked him to stay, but he showed himself to me, not to you. There's this tension between the traditional roles of mother and father. In the same way, there's going to be this tension between the traditional roles of parents and parent and child here. We get the impression that he's an only child. We don't hear about siblings, so you may want to read into that as well. The spoiled only child, especially the one who has long hair and he's very muscular. You can think of that. You can let your imagination run wild. Except for you, sister, you can't. You're not allowed to do that. No, Claire, you've got to keep. Okay, I don't want to get in trouble with Sister Gabi. She's gonna send me. She's gonna chastise me. So I read the text as this, right? We get to the fact that ha'ein bivnot achicha uv'cholami isha, right? Are there no other women? And to me, that sounds like it's reminiscent of the verse in Exodus that I love to quote, Hamibli kfarim. Were there not enough graves in Egypt? Say the embittered Israelites to Moses that we're going to die here. What? There weren't enough graves? Or as we would say, the quintessential Ashkenazic Jew would say, what? There aren't enough women in our place? What? You got to go look at for a shiksa. Excuse me, talking that way, but that's how somebody would talk in this particular situation. We don't have enough good Jewish women here in Brooklyn or in Israel or in Beverly Hills or in Palm Springs. Or in Palm Springs, we'd say, what? There aren't enough beautiful young Jewish men here in Palm Springs. Okay, and so we've got that aspect of it, and then and why do I say it's not gentle language? It's caustic even, because you've got nobody to look for other than the daughter of A. And what is it? Just Philistine? What's the expression here?
Uncircumcised.
Right, uncircumcised, and this we pointed out many times before. It's not just the Israelites and who became later on the Jews who are circumcised. In later culture, in Hellenistic culture, in Roman culture, that was a big deal. That was we even read of in one of the books of Maccabees. I don't remember if it's first or second. We read of Jews that underwent plastic surgery to reconstruct their foreskin because they wanted to be at the baths or the games or whatever it was, and they didn't want people to know they weren't Jewish. But in biblical times, earlier times, I don't know if all, but many Semitic peoples were circumcised. It wasn't a big deal. The weirdos were the Philistines. They were the ones who were the Yotzei Dofen, for the exceptions to the rule that was going on. And you may remember another one of my one of my favorite. There's two explanations as to why there's a place near Jericho called Mount Foreskin, right? I've said this before to some of you before. This Givata Arelim, Givata Orlot. That's the name of the place, right? Foreskin Mount, Foreskin Hill, or Mount Foreskin. And there's two explanations to that. One is from the David story that Saul said, "I'll give you my daughter in marriage if you bring back for me 100 foreskins," right? To which that was just very colorful language. Go out and kill 100 Philistines, and I'll reward you. But he actually brings back the foreskins, if I remember correctly. The other explanation is that the Israelites in the desert did not do circumcision. That was something they didn't do. And then there's a ceremony, they all circumcise themselves during Joshua's time. And then there's a rule. And it could be there were two mountains in Israel that had this name, or it's just one of these, it's a literary topos, of course, that floats around and gets different explanations for the same name. Okay, so that's about the uncircumcised Philistines. So that's why I say this language is polite, but I think it was sarcastic, it was caustic even. And and then he's indignant. No, I want that one. And we can imagine him with his arms folded over his chest as well. No, that's the one I want. No, I don't want the one from Walmart that costs less. I don't want the one from I want that exact doll or that exact toy. I got to have the original, whatever the toy is in my grandson's life at Transporters. Okay. For she pleases me. And then we get an editorial comment, a sidebar, right? That happens from time to time. You know, we can imagine the storyteller around with the little kids or the people around the fire pit. They're telling a story, and then he says, "But you should know it was really God working in the background. God's working in the background like a puppeteer or whatever. God is organizing this thing, this particular all the ingredients for the perfect storm that will bring about eventually Samson's ultimate conflict with the Philistines." Okay. Any comments or questions?
Just the language. He was seeking a pretext against the Philistines. God needs an excuse.
Yeah, you know it's not
Is
that
that
God. Go ahead.
Is the translation accurate?
Yeah, it says to'ana. So to'ana is a pretext, but it's not that God needs a reason. It's not like God says, just give me a reason. Just give me with the gun. Just give me a reason to pull the trigger. No, that I don't. It's God is creating a situation that will be a pretext of war, of clash between the Danites and the Philistines. So God is supplying a pretext, not for God's sake, but for human sake. It's a way of saying God is involved in history, not exactly indirectly, but indirectly. In other words, God could have just taken out the Philistines, right? Well, if we skip to the end of the story and an entire temple falls down on all the aristocrats of the Philistine aristocrats, God could have just brought an earthquake, right? No, there's got to be human involvement for the story to be worthwhile telling. That's really the bottom line. You got to tell a story. There's got to be, and this of course goes to everything that we've been doing until now, all the more so with the Samson stories that have a whiff of mythology to them. It's not about what was, it's not about, is it realistic or not realistic? We're going to get in a second to something that scholars from the 19th century onwards said, well, could this happen, not happen? It's not about that. It's about the story. Is it a good story? And the truth, the historical truth in the story are the values and the ideas that are brought forth in the storytelling as attesting a particular time. We don't know what happened in the life, even if there was a life of Samson. What we do know is at the time that this story was told, the author and those around him wanted to tell us a particular story that would convey particular values, right? That goes in the background of everything we do and everything I do in biblical study. Certainly that's going to be the case in Daniel. When we get to Daniel, I've already begun preparing, and I did teach it. Sasha reminded me, and I started to find my notes hidden in the commentary, or hidden, or as bookmarks. Those are just totally bombastic, miraculous, fantastic, sometimes psychedelic tales, that it's all about the message of the story itself and not about history itself. Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay. Sister Claire, would you read for us, please?
So Samson and his father and mother went down to Timnah. When he came to the vineyards of Timnah for the first time, a full-grown lion came roaring at him. The Spirit of the Lord gripped him, and he tore him asunder with his bare hands, as one might tear a kid asunder. But he did not tell his father and mother what he had done.
Okay. So I'm guessing that some people have heard of this before, and I think that's even the picture. Is that not the picture we use? I don't know if Madalena, if you're available and listening, you could just put up the picture of, I don't even know whose art it was. I forgot when we looked for the picture. I don't know if I found it or you found it, but I don't know whose painting it is. All right, so it could be that she's preoccupied with something else. But take a look at the ad that we do for this course. I think it's a picture of the lion. That's like a quintessential illustration of Samson and the lion tearing it apart. So most of us know this story already. So what do we think about this? Now, when we think about it in the context of what I said just a few minutes ago, well, what's this about?
Is
Well,
it showing?
Are there, okay, are there lions wandering around the ancient land of Israel? I don't picture lions being there.
good question. Yeah, there are lions. They probably were a smaller kind than the ones that we're used to seeing from pictures in Africa. But yes, yeah, and they're lions. There were even some uh, what are the black ones? Leopards? No. What are
Panthers.
Jaguars?
panthers or leopards? There were two alive when I was in the years in the 70s and the 80s that I was doing a lot of hiking around Judean desert. There were still two alive in these large cats that were indigenous, but they I don't know if they're still there. And so there were lions as well. Yeah. By the way, Richard, when you go to Jerusalem, when we go together to Jerusalem, we'll take a half a day at the biblical zoo. The zoo in Jerusalem used to be a smaller one, and it was famous because now it's less so. But every single in the old one that was in like Romema or the other side of town, in front of every single animal, there were verses from the Hebrew Bible, right? So it's the biblical zoo, and of course that doesn't work if you want to have a nicer zoo. Of course, there's a lot more animals. There's no monkeys. Anyway, yeah. So, and I remember seeing, of course, the lions and a quote from this story there. You also have, the lion in Isaiah, right? And again, the same comparison of the opposite on the scale, the spectrum of animals is lions is the strongest, and the weakest, the littlest is the gdi, is the kid, the baby lamb, right? So that same spectrum you have in Isaiah, that the kid shall lie at the feet of the lion, you've got here as well. Wayne, I think you wanted to say something or ask something.
I was just wondering whether God was sending him a message that I'm behind you and here's your strength and use it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. It kind of reminds me in some ways of how did Moses and David learn to be leaders? Anybody? They didn't go to leadership training seminars, right? They didn't go to summer camp, right? They didn't go to the local state, junior college. They were shepherds, right? Moses for 40 years, David beforehand. They learned the art of leadership through first trying it out on the animals. That, to me, that's a parallel here. Samson learns, or a part of his development as a warrior, and an extremely unique warrior is not only to fight and survive with a lion, the greatest of animals. By the way, Richard, there's you may have seen, I've shared with you on different occasions a bas relief, I think it's called, of Lilith in ancient Sumeria. So this is 2000 BCE. So from 4,000 years ago, there's Lilith standing with kind of this strange crown, looks like a snake, but it's not really, holding these magical implements. Sorry, don't know if that was maybe a power surge or
Anybody?
something. I had, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, I can now.
I had to change to my phone, so hopefully that will, I don't know what something blew, I don't know. And I need to get back to it. So the parallel, it seems to me there's a parallel from the world of nature. He learns to be a warrior, great warrior, or part of his training is this chance encounter in the middle of, not in town, in the countryside. And the last part I want to say is that not only does he survive the battle with the lion, he tears it apart as if it was a kid. Again, that spectrum. I hope that answers your question. Anybody else before we go on? Okay.
What does it mean for the first time? He said he went to the vineyards of Timnah for the
Yeah.
first time.
Yeah, let me see. Vayavo ad kame timnata. I don't know why the translation adds that. I didn't check at it. It could be because in parentheses. It could be because it's in some of the ancient versions. I think just in contradistinction to the second time he's going to go back. The second time he goes back is actually one of the focal points of our story. Well, you know what? Let's hold off. I'm not sure why they added here, but I don't see it in the Hebrew. So it could be part of an older version. Very often translations, including the New Jewish Publication Society, less so in the Torah, more so in the prophets and writings, their translation, if they feel there's a problem with the text itself, the way the Masoretic text, as I explained about last time, the traditional, the given tradition of the Hebrew text that we have already for 1,000 years, they will amend the text according to one of the ancient versions, the Greek, the Syriac, Dead Sea Scrolls when available. So I don't have an answer to that other than to say it's compared to the second time that there's going to be another visit to that site where he met the lion. Okay. Why don't you read, Richard? Go ahead.
Am I on mute? No. Okay. Then he went down and spoke to the woman, and she pleased Samson. Returning the following year to marry her, he turned aside to look at the remains of the lion, and in the lion's skeleton he found a swarm of bees and honey. He scooped it into his palms and ate it as he went along. When he rejoined his father and mother, he gave them some and they ate it, but he did not tell them that he had scooped the honey out of the lion's skeleton.
So we're going to have to take this apart a little bit. So first of all, you'll notice that they set out together because he demanded, he wants it, and then he goes off in a different way. So Koifman in his commentary, and remember Koifman writes the commentary, I think in the 50s, he's very much Ish Eretz Yisrael. He's a man of living in the land of Israel, the geography, and yet he's very critical in his thinking and his approach. He's not a traditional Jewish scholar, in other words, Orthodox, although I don't know what his practice was. But he's very critical in his methodology, but thought to be his greatest contribution. For me, it's his two commentaries to Joshua and Judges. But Scotty, do you remember what it's called in English? It's the history history of the religion of ancient Israel. I don't know what it's called in English, but it's like a huge multiple volume work on the theology and the
You froze for a minute. What are you trying to translate?
Yechezkel Koifman's work in English. It's translated by Moshe Greenberg. I can't remember what it's called now. Anyway, really important scholar. But when I read him, and because of the language and because of my own background, I feel like, oh yeah, he went out there. He went out there to check to see what's the area of Timnah. What does it look like? What does it feel like? So he goes into great detail here. He says, well, his parents, they're older folks. They went on the regular path. But he knew all the little nooks and crannies where he could go in between the vineyards. He was this wild kid, like this kind of a Mowgli, Jungle Book kind of, although in the landscape of the land of Israel, he was out in the fields. He went in his own way. And so he split up there. And I think that from a literary point of view, that serves again to describe this strange relationship between the parents and their child. On one hand, he doesn't get married by himself, but he insists, no, you have to do that because that's the formally your father, you've got to arrange for the marriage. No, why don't you take one? No, I want that one, right? So he insists. So he's not respecting his parents, right? Their authority, but he's utilizing their formal authority. Same thing, he's with them, he walks with them. We just saw, he even comes back tenderly, he brings them honey, right? He's such a good, you're such a good bocher, such a good kindle. You brought us some honey. You can imagine, I know all my impersonations of older Jews is always Ashkenazic. I'm sorry, what can I do? That's my background. It's not Sfaradi, it's not Mizrahi. And so that's the kind of family construct here, which is a very strange one, a very unique one for a very unique hero, a very unique character. So he goes off on his own. Symbolically, he goes off on his own, right? His parents, they do the regular road. He's doing his own thing. The rules don't apply to this kid. And then he goes out and the rules don't apply. And so much so the rules don't apply, he can kill a lion with his bare hands. And then when he comes back after a year, the year time is very traditional in biblical literature and ancient Near East as well. Even today, you'll find rabbis, even conservative rabbis, that under the chuppah will explain. Until now in our ceremony, it was this part, and now, going now forward, it's the second part. In the time of the rabbis, I've never done that because I don't really think it interests the bride and the groom to have a history lesson while they're standing under the canopy. It certainly doesn't apply to most. I did most of the weddings in Israel to the ones that are just waiting to get back to the bar and the food. So, but that is a very traditional thing, the first part of the agreement, and then a year later or a time later. And that has a lot to do with the fact that the bride was more often than not a young girl before the age of maturity. And when she was physically mature, then childbearing, then she could have children. So back to the story. So again, he goes off on his own and he checks out what's going on. Now here, the translation it's a correct translation from a linguistic point of view, but I think it's been sensitized, as I did before. It's easier language. He took the honey out of the skeleton, and maybe that is the case. But when you read in Hebrew, the word, do you see the Hebrew, Scotty? Or for those that read the Hebrew? Vihine adat dvorim, and lo, behold, a swarm of bees, or whatever you call, Geviyat aryeh. What do you think of when you hear the word Geviyah, Scotty? Or somebody else Hebrew, Geviyah?
I can't think of the word. Not a.
The corpse. A Geviyot are corpses, bodies, dead
I can't
bodies.
think of the word.
So all these years, and maybe I'm influenced by paintings that I saw, I'm thinking of this carcass, half decomposed carcass of a lion. It must take a while. I don't know how long it takes, right? But it's there. And then there's, you can imagine it's ichi, the fur and the ribs and the bones, and then the bees made a hive in there. Koifman goes into great detail. He says, well, everybody knows bees don't do that, right? Bees don't make their hives. And of course, that's not the point of the story, but he comes to the conclusion, which also the translators came to, no, this is after the body totally deteriorated, and and they made a hive in the skull. Well, that's a nice place, right? A nice protection to make a beehive. I don't think that the natural accuracy is what's important here. I think it's the story itself. It may be related to other similar stories and other folkloric traditions. I don't know. Gaster on this, who I look to, it doesn't have a lot of material here, not a lot of material, relevant material at least. But there's a bigger question though. First of all, he didn't tell his parents. Well, why didn't he tell his parents? He didn't tell his parents where it's funny. He gave them honey, but he didn't say where he bought it, right? Any ideas why he didn't tell? Why does the text bother to tell us that?
Well, if you read ahead, it's important to the story.
Right. If you read ahead, it could be important to the story because it's his little secret. So that's kind of how Zakovich would say here. He says this. He's done the you know, the people you meet in the world that have issues with communicating with other people, they keep a lot of things to themselves. They're very clever. It's a form of power, right? Of strength. This is, I know this and you don't know, right? And then I'm not gonna tell you, you know, I got this honey. And where'd you get that? I'm not gonna tell you, you know. There could be another reason as well. And it could, and I would say, as in most cases, it's probably both reasons. The body of this animal is impure. And remember, he is commanded to remain pure. Now, we all know that he gets violent. If you get violent and you kill people, although there are Jewish, medieval Jewish commentaries, maybe even rabbinic before that, that'll say, oh, well, he didn't actually kill them, you know, with his hands. He didn't touch the bodies. He killed them in such a way where he didn't have to touch their bodies because he's not allowed to touch the bodies, right? Of course, I would say that the whole story is here to tell us that he was supposed to be one thing, but he wasn't. He couldn't obey, he wasn't disciplined. And nonetheless, regardless, God used him, through him, God, you know, led the battle against the Philistines for the Israelites. I think that's one of the points of our story. And so it's already here. Perhaps he didn't say to his parents because he would get in trouble. No, what you're not supposed to touch is impure. You can't touch the honey. Fixa. It's not kosher. It's treif honey, right? By the way, there's an interesting question, of course, if how is honey kosher? And I'm not going to answer this now. There's a lot of different things, but bees' honey shouldn't be kosher, right? Because if by extension, it's not the same, but to the ancient mind, honey of a bee is like milk to a mammal, right? So cow's milk is kosher, but camel's milk is not kosher, right? Pig's milk is not kosher. But, and although you could say the same thing about a human being, right? Mother's milk is from a non-kosher animal. So yeah, obviously it's not such a simple kind of thing. So that's one of those clever things that you know, that certain guys in the yeshiva, they knew the answer to, and I still can't remember the answer. Why it is that bees were allowed to eat. Yeah, okay. All right. It's not so easy not to get off on a tangent. Okay, so we got the honey. He scooped it out. It's impure. Didn't tell his parents, and they're on their way to finish up this whole thing. So let's go on. Yeah, unless there's any other questions. No. So Trudy, you want to read for us? We're in. Yeah, we're at 10:13.
So his father came down to the woman, and Samson made a feast there, as young men used to do. When they saw him, they designated 30 companions to be with him. Then Samson said to them, "Let me propound a riddle to you. If you can give me the right answer during the 7 days of the feast, I shall give you 30 linen tunics and 30 sets of clothing. But if you are not able to tell it to me, you must give me 30 linen tunics and 30 sets of clothing." And they said to him, "Ask your riddle and we will listen."
Hey. The beginning of this paragraph is Vayered Avihu. And the beginning of the previous paragraph was Vayered. And the beginning of the previous paragraph was Vayered. There's a lot of Vayered, which means technically to go to. I'm sorry, we've got some noise from somebody. If we could, if you can mute if you're not speaking, please. Okay, thank you. And so there's a lot of this going down. Remember what I said in the first verse is it's not geographically going down or topographically going down. It means to go aside. But in this particular instance, Vayered Avihu el Aisha, and his father approaches the woman. And by the way, this is interesting. Usually the bride would be called a betula, a virgin, or a na'ara, a young woman. here she's a woman, which may connote that she is either a widow, or it's the narrator's way of saying this is not, something else is going on here. This is not a normal romantic relationship. This is not Romeo and Juliet. This is, and again, you've got this man child who has said, I want that one. You know, who knows? And then the father goes to the woman to arrange it. Why is the father not going to the parents to arrange it? The woman's father, for instance. And I think this is a mirror of the beginning, where Samson leaves where he's supposed to be amongst his own people and goes and finds a bride amongst the others, amongst the non-Israelites, the non-Danites. And his father actually does the same. Where perhaps this is a way of, I say perhaps it's a way of the narrator saying his father should have been more mature. His father should have said, no, I'm not going to be part of this. These are the Philistines we're talking about. These are not just NOP. These are our arch enemies. I'm not going to be part of this. And yet it feels like, and that he goes to the woman himself, it feels like he's been taken in by this. The father's been taken in by this. Again, part of this problematic or complex family dynamic that I began with today, that we're going to see onwards. Okay, so they're going to do a party like the guys do. That's what the boys will be boys, right? They'll have their party. Now, it doesn't make any mention here of wine and whiskey and other kinds of ways to imbibe. But it kind of what is a party if it's not with wine in ancient times? And you got to wonder. So, and I don't know if folks who are in recovery who are with us on this session, and that's always an issue in the beginning. I didn't really understand. Sasha, you said, we shouldn't have wine on the table when we have people in recovery at the table. This kind of, others say, no, that's part of dealing with recovery, complex issues, and not the space and the time for that here. But if Samson wasn't allowed to drink wine, he's sure doing a lot of he's doing a lot of partying. And we had that in the Midrash last week. You remember when the Midrash said, he said, oh, you think this is bad? Just think if he would have been drinking wine, if he would have been getting high, it would have been even worse. So there's this tension here of Samson's regulations, or the requirements of his Nazarite, his Nazarhood, his Nizirut, and not really keeping them, whether it's the impurity or whether it's the wine, right? In the background, not explicitly, but in the background. Okay.
Rabbi, going back to his father going to the proposed wife, her family's never been mentioned. And that's giving her power that no woman really has, as we've seen so far. She's making her own mind up whether to do it.
And so I think that's a form, I agree, Gary, that's a form of foreshadowing as to what's going to happen in the story. This is not a typical situation. She's not an innocent, this is sexist, but
she's not naive.
Yeah, she's not an innocent young woman who's about to go to it seems like something else is going on. The narrator wants us to know something's fishy about this whole situation. Please don't understand in no way. I think that the parents of young men should always go to the daughter and ask permission. Are you sure you want to marry my son? Do you have any idea? He can't make his bed, doesn't know how to cook. Okay. All right. And then 30, I think, because it's 7 days, another typological number. I don't know if there's any other special meaning about, other than it's 7:30 are typological numbers. But what kind of tunics, what I call it, I don't know. Other than to say that in Genesis 38, where there is this encounter between Judah and his daughter-in-law, who he cheats, right? You go back and read the story, you'll see how, but there's also an issue of clothes there, and she dresses up as something else. And it's in Timnah, clothes in Timnah, maybe there's a connection, don't know. I'm sure Yair pointed that out and had some interpretation of it, but I didn't consult his book lately. In fact, I'm not even sure where it is. His book on this story, Chayeshim Shon, The Life of Samson. I said mistakenly, I think I said it was his PhD dissertation. It wasn't. His PhD dissertation was on something totally different, something common between poetry, biblical poetry, and narrative, which is a particular form, literary form. And this I think was his first book that was published, certainly in Hebrew. No, not certainly in Hebrew. His first book published. Most of his books were only in Hebrew in the beginning. He didn't do English until much later. Okay. I just don't know if we're going to finish everything today. So why don't we go ahead? Eileen, would you like to read for us?
So he said to them, out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. For 3 days they could not answer the riddle.
Okay, so before we go on, I mean, this is the riddle itself. Doing riddles in wedding feasts is like a common thing, even, across. One of the reasons I think that people in the scholarly world were less impressed with Gaster's work, which I consult for parallels in the world around it, was that if you've got a parallel from the 12th, 13th century in Europe, how is that a parallel that helps us understand necessarily, other than perhaps it was inspired by something in the Bible, but he's constantly going back to common or Arabic culture of his time. So does Sojin. They both go back to Arabic culture, which in some ways feels a little insulting. I think if you're in the 20th century or even the 19th century, and you say that you would use Bedouin culture or Arab culture from wherever you visited, and you focused on it. And of course, people didn't have that wide of a knowledge of what's going on throughout the entire Arab world, but they focused on one particular thing, and they'll say, "Oh, we can understand this by this is how they do it." Something feels perhaps now today, with the sensitivity that I think some of us have or trying to have, it's insulting to say that these people are doing the same thing that people were doing 3,000 years ago. I think it's something we need to think about. I don't know that it necessarily helps. So a lot of the parallels that I saw in preparing for today were, well, this is the custom in different cultures, to do riddles. It could have been widespread around the ancient world. I don't know, but it sounds like something you do at a wedding, right? A game of sorts, a social game. Now, the riddle itself, in Hebrew, what they tried to do, what the translation here reflects, the poetics of it, right? Out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet. It even rhymes nicely, right? And that reflects the Hebrew. It's easy, ochel, mea ochel came machal, ochel, it's the same root, right? The food, and it's the same Hebrew root, achal, to eat. It would have been nice, of course, to our aesthetics, if the next part would also be, linguistically, az yatzamatok, from, and sometimes I think you hear from the bitter came the sweet. Az or oz is strength. We know it from our prayers. Ozi v'zimrat ya, right? My strength, and my refuge, or my fortress is God. Yeah, I'm sure I can't think of another example right now. But of course, the lion is implied here, right? The lion is the strength. The sweetness is the honey, and from the eater, that is the lion who eats. And in many Semitic languages, the word to eat is the nickname for lion, is the eater. So that's kind of goes with other stuff of the time. But what's wrong with this riddle? You tell me.
Well, only Samson knows the answer.
Yeah, it's again, I feel uncomfortable quoting Yair Zakovitch so often, but I feel guilty saying these things as if it's my own insight. But I remember him saying, he says, he's the spoiled child who's got his own little world going on. And he says, I'll ask you a question, as if that's a chokhmah. Ki'ilu shezeh chokhmah. It's not, that's stupid. That's not a real riddle, right? That's not a game. That's, yeah. I bet you can't guess what I'm thinking of right now. Well, how is that interesting? How is that? That's just stupid. That's silly. That's immature. And this is indicative of his lack of maturity. So he's got this big zlob, great body that can literally tear apart a lion, but he's got the mind of a child, or the emotional intelligence of a child, right? To ask that kind of a question. And that's why this is a complex and interesting story, I think, because God is what we already heard. God's working in the background, whatever, but this is problematic because it's not fair. It's simply not fair. So what goes on forward, where he's treated unfairly, favos nicht, why not? I mean, he set the tone for this after all. So, and of course, I think in the background, that's the whole, if I forget to say it in a few minutes, in the background is exactly that message. Even though it's not fair, even though he's immature, even though God is still pulling the strings from a distance. Okay, thanks for being here, Wayne. So I don't know, what do you folks want to continue, or should we put off the rest until next week? I know it's a dangerous thing, but let me ask this way: do other people have to go in the next 10 minutes?
I would say the internet connection is really, I don't know, I'm having lots of problems with going in and out, so I would just put it off to when we have a better connection.
Okay, yeah, it has
That's
to do
my
with
opinion.
okay, it has to do with the fact I'm using my phone. So we'll pick up on this next week and continue from there. Sorry I'll figure out now what's happening with my Wi-Fi, and I love you all.
Okay, thank you.